Just think about this. You have on several layers of clothing, along with a huge hoop, petticoats, and corsets. One is about the size of a small tent. You are the act of going to a royal ball and drinking tea with the nobles. What is it now? How do you lift all that cloth? Where do you go from here? How did women manage to do that? Do you menstruate while wearing those dresses? Welcome to the Victorian era, a time known for its elegance, strict adherence to rules, and completely baffling hygiene problems. Women were trusted for many years, up until the Victorian era. Clothes with big skirts and crinolines. Victoria was a fashion icon in her own right, and the Queen was one of them. These kinds of puffy clothes showed ideas of femininity, grace, and elegance, as well as how to behave properly. However, most history books talk about a daily struggle behind the beauty, not to be brought up. In the early Victorian era, toilets that flushed and underground sewers were like something out of a storybook. At that time, Europeans had not yet accepted the very idea of a toilet. When nature called, you answered from wherever you were. Had been. An old saying goes, when you get to it is imperative that you leave immediately. That was a fact, plain and simple. About life, people went to the bathroom wherever they could because there was no plumbing inside. In the shade of trees, next to wide fields, or on the right side of their homes. You really did hear that. Yes, inside. Have you ever heard someone say something? Did they not have a pot to pee in? Yes, that was a colorful insult that meant more than that. There were terrible truths to be found. This was a reference to a pot. It is a simple bowl that serves as a chamber pot, collecting poop and pee for testing. You couldn't have one. Your only option was to buy one, get out of the house, and ask God for some peace and quiet. Also, there are riots all over the city. In the Victorian era, everything in these pots was thrown away. Immediate exit through the window and entry into the below are the cobblestones. In addition to being a fashion accessory, umbrellas were also useful. The statements, they were important parts of a survival kit in a city where trash could fall from the sky at any time. In some parts of the UK, there was a common word for a chamber pot, which is also known as a jerry. It came with a lid when it was first bought. The lid was used, and it was tightly closed. Not for the sake of civility, kid. There was a warning. This kettle is full to the brim. Approach at your own risk. You would never see a chamber pot in the beautiful homes of the elites, nobles, and royals of the Victorian era. But don't fool yourself, they could be hidden anywhere. In beautiful cabinets, hidden in decorative furniture, or in furniture that is discreetly made from chairs. During the day, they had to check and empty the servants' rooms many times, so even rich people couldn't escape the call of nature. If you had the money, your bathroom could have a private wooden bench with a seat. For example, inside was a hidden chamber pot. On the other hand, no matter how elegant the house is, I still have a question. Where did all the trash go? To get in, you had to go through the wardrobe, which was a style from the Middle Ages that was built on the top floors of the building. There were also toilet buildings that were often hanging in a dangerous way in the streets or alleys. At that time, the answer was that it was time to empty the pot. It's simple. Open the window and throw it. To keep people who happened to pass by from getting wet, the words gardello, French, would echo all around. So you should be on the lookout for the water. Notice that something extremely rude appeared to be going to fall from a great height. The putrid odor, it is intolerable. Homes are raging, and streets are raging. Floodwaters spilled, and entire cities were submerged. The trash that they themselves produce, there were certain streets that have increased. A set of stone steps that allowed pedestrians to leap above the garbage that is flowing. However, Here is the real kicker. In the course of the Napoleonic and agents of the government from the English civil wars, began collecting chamber pots by going door to door. What is contained? How come, considering that urine, yes, the urine was processed into saltpeter, which is an essential component in the production of gunpowder. Without a doubt, your urine was a source of fuel. Conflict. In addition, the women of the time period wore crinolines, petticoats, and layers of crinolines. Bodices and overskirts are used. There are so many layers that knickers and other types of underwear were not. It is even essential. By virtue of all that cloth swinging and swishing, yet nobody seemed to notice. Whatever was not hidden behind. Indeed, you did hear it. That is correct. Many years during the Victorian era, women went about their daily lives without, that is, knickers. It was not until the late hours of the period during which those enormous bell-shaped blasts of wind started blowing through the crenellations, and exposing women to public humiliation because of it. Having modesty required a different approach. It is only then did the members of society murmur. Perhaps it's, however, these weren't the drawers that were needed. A thought that you are having a pair of pants without a crotch from before the Victorian era. 2 legs of a pair of pants only joined at the waist, with a split in the middle where it was most important, which was down the middle. Flaps of cotton that overlapped each other gave just enough coverage where you squatted. They opened up like curtains on a stage. Why? Because the women weren't going to do it. 20 pounds of shifts, petticoats, and other things. Skirts, when they heard the call of nature. These were the drawers in a woman's crotch that she could open. She just has to bend over a kitchen pot. With grace and care, without giving up representing the whole world, or at least a small group of people. How did it work? Chamber pots for women were made to fit their bodies. They were oval in shape and scooped out to fit snugly between the insides of the thigh muscles, unlike the round ones that men wear. A maiden would put the pot in place, on top of her skirts. No squatting will be allowed. Absolutely necessary, but just a clever move with the material being used. If done right, no one in the room would even notice. There were a lot of people at the fancy balls and other social events. There are rooms set aside just for this. There were a lot of pots inside that needed to be filled, and maids were standing by, just like nurses on the battlefield. One person put the box in front of her, while another person peeled back the many layers of the dress she was wearing. After that, she was able to go back to the ballroom as if nothing had happened after a quick wipe down with a wet cloth was going on. Not all women had that luxury. This was true for a lot of people. Not as complicated and more rough. Put the pot on the ground, pull up your skirt, and clean up with whatever you have. There were old newspapers, leaves, and corn cobs, among other things. Don't worry, we'll dive in. We'll talk more about those cute little details later. A linen shift was at the very bottom of a woman's cupboards. Long-lasting, easy to clean, and moved around a lot. Maids don't always wear the same clothes every day. Even though they wore a lot fewer layers and didn't let themselves wear expensive clothes or sleep in private rooms, they still looked good. In the Victorian era, privacy was a luxury that very few people even thought about. Expecting, especially when it comes to using the toilet, there was no need to be modest when nature called. Families with lower incomes often had to go to the bathroom between the two of them. There weren't any separate water closets, and the doors weren't closed. It could be the pot, the floor, or even the yard itself. Men are expected to go to fancy events, would just go into the garden and walk there, do their business in the middle of the roses. But now it's time to get down to business. is the one that everyone wants to ask but is too scared to do so. How did people in the Victorian era clean themselves? Their lower parts. Put on your seatbelt. The dried maize cob was a symbol of the Victorian era and was one of the most popular tools of the time. The right word is corn on the cob without the kernels. The rotation was like that of a simple roller brush to clean the area very well. And if it sounds old-fashioned, remember that these weren't very sensitive instruments. They were given out again, cleaned only once in a while, if at all. Another favorite is the sea sponge on a stick. Hold on to it. After each use, it was dipped in water. In a shared bucket that was full of salt, vinegar, water, or both. Used a second time on several occasions. Also, it wasn't just the Victorian era. Clay, rocks, and dirt are the parts that made up the earlier humans. The earth itself, by itself. The goal was not to make people feel better. Not getting dirty, that is very suspicious. In fact, it was about doing the things you were supposed to do. Also, things that were found in the back of the bus, like seashells, leaves, and straw. You can probably guess how well that would have gone. As paper became more common and Victorians began to look for cheaper ways to use printed materials. Magazines, newspapers, and catalogues are all examples of this. If you've ever wondered what happened to last month's issue, it might have been the end of it. In the top part of the chamber container, we don't know for sure, but it didn't start to take shape. To the end of the 1800s, when patents were first used, it wasn't until the early 1900s that it started to show up, but it was made in large amounts. Sheets that are soft and curled up, like the ones we have now. Before that, let's say we went on a trip to the bathroom, which didn't feel as good. We don't think about the things we've done in the past anymore. So, how did women in the Victorian era deal with their periods in those highlands that were surrounded by fabric and steel? To start, it's important to understand that Victorian women had fewer periods than women do now. Why? This is the main reason. I am now between the ages of 12 and 14, which is when puberty started. But menopause often started early, usually when a woman was 30 and a half. In addition to that, not getting enough nutrients and working out too much meant that many women had cycles that weren't regular. But there are fewer times, meant that there were no periods. But that was when Victorian women came out. Faced it without a single pad, tampon, or roll of toilet paper. Or something that can be thrown away. They were able to find things. Women didn't wear clothes that were too tight. Pants that fit well. In fact, their first, he wore a long linen shift, which was an undergarment, cover that could be washed and would protect expensive clothes from stains and oils that come off the body. But they came over right away when the bleeding started. People often call it the tea bandage. Picture a short, classic bikini bottom that is tied. It was fixed with a piece of tape around the waist. The cloth that was woven between the legs. There were a lot of absorbent rags inside it. The woman couldn't afford clothes. You could use layers, moss, or sheep wool. Grass or anything else she might find that would soak up the blood. These were the rags. That is not thrown away. They went through the process of washing, dried, and then used every month after that. Women often went through changes. Depending on how busy they are, they can work anywhere from 12 to 20 hours a day on their tea bandages. It was tiring, uncomfortable, and hard. Without a doubt, necessary. On days when things weren't so bad, some people just wore petticoats that were thicker, hoping that the extra fabric would keep whatever they needed safe. It is spreading. However, split crotch drawers became more common in the later part of the Victorian era. They didn't really protect anything, designed for bathroom use, not for cleaning up the mess that comes with menstruation. In the middle of it all, a lot of women were supposed to stay graceful, not move, and not say anything about what was going on. They were able to do it. Blood, pain, and a bad smell. Everything had to be hidden and kept in layers, in the form of silk, lace, and strict rules. No one said anything, but every woman did. I was there. How did people in the Victorian era clean their clothes? You mean those huge clothes that go all the way to the floor? Specifically, those with trains, lace, ruffles, and yards of velvet. At least, it isn't the case. Not the same as what we do now. Doing laundry in the Victorian era was hard work. You had to carry water, wash your hair with soap, and follow a long, hard routine. It was done in homes only twice a week a year ago, during what was sadly called the very nice wash. Imagine having to wait 6 months for someone to clean your clothes. That isn't true. Not trying hard enough. It is a matter of life and death. As you can see, people in the Victorian era didn't throw their clothes in the bathtub to clean it with a little soap. It was rare and dangerous to do full washings. Soap can also damage fragile materials when they are wet. Then, on the other hand, the ladies cleaned their dresses by putting talcum powder on them. I sprinkled it on them, sweeping away the dust, and on top of that, sweat and skin odor mixed together. There was no way to stop the smell. In simple terms, it covered it. If a dress was worn instead of being worn, carefully folded and put in cedarine to protect closets or trunks that are meant to keep moths and bugs out. This was a priceless jewel. Along with clothes, however, artisanal works are sewn with great skill, care, and the best materials that can be found. On the other hand, these clothes were worn until they couldn't be worn anymore, or until the smell was so strong that it made you scream almost before you even knew it. But underneath those beautiful gowns, which were hidden from view, were the real protectors against dirt. This includes crinolines, shifts, chemises, and petticoats, which are all types of reusable undergarments. These did a good job of soaking up sweat and keeping the expensive clothes safe. Some of them might need to be washed by hand in boiling water with strong soap, often by overworked laundresses or maids. The price of Victorian elegance was sweat and smell. Now, let's get to the main point. Ask about it. If you could, would you go back in time and live your life as if? Why is this? Walking through sewage while wearing layers of silk and soot, brushing powder over body odor, and using moss and rags to control periods are some of the things that happen. Please let us know in the please leave your comments below.